The Federal Writers Project sent out-of-work writers to interview former slaves and to document the experiences these slaves had while they were held in slavery. This project was sponsored by the Works Progress Administration. The Federal Writers Project took place in the Depression years, from 1936 to 1938. The writers for this project went to 17 states to interview people. At the beginning of the project, only 4 of the states were the writers interviewing former slaves. In the rest of the states the writers went to, ordinary people were being interviewed. The project changed so that all of the interviews were with former slaves. The Slave Narrative Collection was created with the interviews the writers conducted. This is the largest body of slave memories that has ever been collected. The writers would usually visit the former slaves twice to make sure that they are receiving all of the information, and oftentimes the writer would take photos of the former slaves at their home or wherever the interview took place. In 1939, the Federal Writers Project ran out of funding, so the writers were forced to send in whatever manuscript that they had done, and then the editing process began for the Slave Narrative Collection. These narratives provide first-person accounts of slavery, and they also provide information about the people that slavery affected. Most of the slaves that were interviewed only experienced slavery when they were children, and they were freed before they were adults. A lot of the slaves did not want to talk bad about their owners and would say that they treated them the best they could. There are more than 2,300 interviews in the Slave Narrative Collection. One of the interviews that was conducted was with a former slave named Charlie Williams. Charlie was 94 years old when this interview took place. This interview took place at his home in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Charlie was holding his granddaughter in the picture that was taken of him. In this interview, Charlie Williams said how he was not too worried about dying soon because he wanted to see his old master. Charlie said, "I reckon maybe I'll just go up and ask him what he want me to do, and he'll tell me, and if'n I don't know how he'll show me how, and I'll try to do it to please him. And when I get it done, I wants to hear him grumble like he used to and say, 'Charlie, you ain't got no sense, but you is a good boy.'" Charlie went on to say that he realized that heaven was most likely not going to be like this, but this is the way that he hoped it would be, and that he could not think of a way it could be any better. This is very unusual because most slaves at this time wanted nothing to do with their masters and never wanted to see them again, but Charlie was actually hoping to see and speak to his master again. Even though these slaves were all freed from slavery, they all still struggled in many ways. Most of them would struggle financially, and they would struggle to find work. The homes that they lived in were not very nice, and they had very little furniture in there. These former slaves are happy that they are no longer held in slavery, but they are still not as happy as they would like to be. One woman named Hattie Thompson, who was interviewed when she was 72 years old, talked about how her and her husband were struggling. Hattie and her husband were living in Arkansas when this interview took place. Hattie was saying how different things are now compared to then. When she first came to Arkansas with her husband and her daughter, she said that she never struggled to find work, but times are a lot different now. She said, "In the spring, we could get wild pork greens to cook. You can't get none now. Something to eat was not as hard to get then as it is now." She said that her husband suffered from rheumatism and would work in the fields when he could, and that she would iron laundry when she could find work. They were still struggling to find money, so that was very hard on them. The Slave Narrative Collection is very important and is still used today to understand the struggles that these former slaves went through. Each of these interviews are the former slaves' first-hand experiences with slavery and how their lives are still affected from their slavery days. All of these people thought that their lives were going to get drastically better when they are freed, but oftentimes their lives are just as hard, if not harder, as when they are slaves. They still struggle to find work or to get food, and the houses that they are currently living in are not very nice. Most of the people that were interviewed were very old, yet they continued to work because they did not have a choice. If they did not work, then they would not have enough money for anything, but working was sometimes difficult for them due to their health. The slave narrative collection will continue to be used for understanding former slaves' lives during and after slavery.